In the program Current Affairs, we now bring you a discussion on terror attacks and India-Pakistan relations. The participants are Salman Haider, former Foreign Secretary, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, Security Analyst, and Jyoti Malhotra, Senior Journalist, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
Welcome to this discussion. I'd like to start by asking you, Mr. Haider, not only we'll talk about the upcoming meeting between the two Prime Ministers in New York, but also to put it in context, perhaps, of the Fedayeen attacks that have taken place in Jammu and Kashmir about 24 hours ago. What do you think is the meaning of this? Why is it that 3 days before the Prime Ministers are to meet in New York that we've had such a big attack?
It seems evident that there are these elements, and they're not newly produced elements. They have been active for ages in South Asia, who want to disturb relations between India and Pakistan. Whenever there is any positive sign, the risk of an attack, of some deliberate, concerted effort to disturb the relationship becomes evident, becomes visible. And this has happened several times before. The timing of such attacks is bad, but this is a particularly bad and nasty one that people have been able to infiltrate through from the Pakistani side to Indian territory.
Are you saying that they did infiltrate through the Pakistani side? Because there is a Kashmiri group that has taken responsibility. So is the jury out on that yet?
I thought that the initial reports suggested that they had come across from the other side. But either way, I think the linkage between the terror groups is evident. The common interest of people who don't want to see any soothing of relations between India and Pakistan is there, whether they are in Kashmir, or whether they've come into Kashmir now, or whether they've been lurking there for quite some time. I think that this is an opportunity. The risk of such an attack was palpable even before anything happened or any such developments were talked of, that efforts could be made for the familiar reason of keeping distance between these countries and breeding hatred and discord.
Commander Uday Bhaskar, would you agree with Mr. Salman Haider that this terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir a day ago was really to disrupt the meeting between the two Prime Ministers?
I think it would be fair to say that the kind of attack that we saw yesterday is part of a pattern which has, I would say, a history of almost 15 years, if not more, wherein at the first sign that there is any kind of a political rapprochement or a thaw in the relationship, various constituencies.
Who are these constituencies?
I would say that they are grey at this point in time, meaning that in Pakistan we have history where the Pakistani military, the army in particular, has used support to terror groups as part of their own strategy. This has been more graphically described as bleeding the enemy by 1,000 cuts. My own observation as a security analyst, somebody who's been trying to study this for almost 20 years, I would say that this goes back to May 1990, where elements in the Pakistani establishment, particularly the military and the Pakistani intelligence agencies, have actively sought to support groups on this side in Jammu and Kashmir.
But what happened now in 2013, so that's 23 years later? Are you saying that the Pakistani establishment, whether it's the army or the intelligence agencies, haven't given up the strategy of bleeding India by 1,000 cuts, even though there is a democratically elected government in Pakistan, and in fact there has been a democratic transition in Pakistan? So are you saying that Nawaz Sharif is still perhaps not fully in control?
Yeah, I mean, the last part is easier to answer. I would suggest that Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is not yet fully in control on the three elements that are crucial to India in terms of its security interests. One is the support to terror. The second is Pakistan's Kashmir policy. And the third is the management of nuclear weapons and missiles. I maintain that control on these three still rests in Rawalpindi, which is the headquarters of the Pakistani military, and not in Islamabad, which is what Mr. Nawaz Sharif is trying to do. And that is where, just to finish this, I believe that India must be seen to be engaging with Mr. Nawaz Sharif so as to strengthen his hand at this point where the transition is very complex and it is clearly being contested. So that's my reading, that this particular constituency that we speak about, over the last 23 years, from 1990 to now, it has grown. Some of them have acquired a certain autonomy, and therefore what we are seeing now is a very complex challenge, and whether these groups are within Kashmir or they are still getting support from outside, which is why it's a bit grey. And as you rightly said, even now this particular attack, is it from that side? Is it a group here? I think the support from the other side is quite evident.
Mr. Haider, to pick up from what Commander Uday Bhaskar just said, he's talking about perhaps the proliferation of armed groups inside Pakistan. I've just come back from Pakistan actually just a few days ago, and it seems to me that the debate inside Pakistan now is actually growing in another direction, which is that Pakistanis themselves are talking about these terror groups and how they are devouring the hand that once fed them. What is your analysis? Do you think that there is bad faith still on the part of the Pakistani establishment as Commander Bhaskar describes them, and is there still this distinction between the establishment, which is the army, and Nawaz Sharif, who is elected Prime Minister?
Well, your experience and the impressions you've brought back from Pakistan should encourage us that there's some sort of rethinking of the benefits and the fallout from this strategy that has been adopted for more than 20 years now.
But what is your analysis?
I haven't been in Pakistan recently.
But you follow the story.
Yes, but my feeling is that the problem is not of bad faith. I would not accuse the incoming government of Mr. Nawaz Sharif of bad faith. I think that there is a track record. We can look at it. He's been Prime Minister before. He's had extensive dealings with India. It's much more likely, as Uday was saying, that he's not in a position to control these people. He's yet to get his act together in the sense of the important things are about to happen in Pakistan internally, and it is expected that he will consolidate his authority progressively over the next few months. At the moment, he may not be in a position to curb elements that have taken matters in their own hands and that have been more or less outside control while they are taking advantage of the official facilities and the official imprimatur that they enjoy.
But would you say then that this democratic transition that has now taken place in Pakistan from the government of the People's Party of Pakistan led now to Nawaz Sharif's party, to his government, that increasingly there is a democratic assertion inside Pakistan?
I think that is taking place now. There is a democratic assertion. It's not only elections, it's not only at the political level. The media, the public in its expression in many different forums is asking questions. And questions saying, well, what have we gained? Why are we pursuing a policy which guarantees hostility with India without any clear benefit to us? And on whose behalf are we then being led in this direction? I think these questions are being raised.
These are important questions, Uday. Wouldn't you agree that the people of Pakistan are asking these questions and they want to know who is in power? Are the old institutions, the old guard, as you put it, the army and the intelligence agencies, do they still retain control? Is it Nawaz Sharif?
I think a number of questions are being asked in Pakistan, and I would say that if you go back to the period when General Musharraf was actually ousted and he lost power, from about 2007-8 to now, roughly over the last 4 or 5 years, many questions are being asked in Pakistan by the citizens of that country, and the most critical question to them is, where do our security interests lie? And where do the challenges come from? Is it from within, or is it from the traditional quote-unquote enemy that India has been projected as far as the official narrative of the Pakistani military is concerned? And that is where I believe the internal dynamic and this whole question of the rise of the Taliban, the Pakistan Taliban,
the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan,
the TTP, and the ideology that we associate with the TTP. Now that, I think, is to me the more disturbing element, and that is the crucial question that many people in Pakistan are asking. You use the term, they are now, in a way, devouring the hand that fed them. Now, people in Pakistan are aware that the establishment, going back to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, has been complicit, 1979 to now, that over the last 3.5 decades, that they have been supporting terror groups as part of an officially approved strategy. After all, in 1979, when the ISI was supporting the Mujahideen, it had the approval of the West, the US-led West. Now, that in turn has, in a way, transformed, and we now have the groups such as the LET, Hafiz Saeed,
Lashkar-e-Toiba.
Lashkar-e-Toiba, or for that matter, groups operating in Afghanistan. So I think the people of Pakistan are asking the same questions, and Peshawar is the most recent example.
When about 80 people were killed.
And the sectarian violence. So all of this is now, in a way, coming to haunt Pakistan. So my point is, many questions are being asked. But at the end of the day, despite this internal turbulence, for us the challenge remains. And the challenge is manifest in what happened yesterday. And the enormity of what happened yesterday was the fact that we actually have a case where an army camp has been attacked with considerable audacity and impunity, and you lose a 2IC of a battalion. 16 Cav is a crack regiment. And these are serious sort of, I would say, challenges to Indian security. So we have to, I think, recognize that particular contour of what we are addressing, and this could well happen again. That's the point.
Mr. Haider, Uday sort of put it very beautifully that while there is an internal turbulence inside Pakistan, and we saw on Sunday in Peshawar how 80 people were killed when a suicide bomber attacked one of Pakistan's oldest churches in Peshawar. Now, India has been saying to Pakistan for several years, since the Mumbai attacks in 2008, and it's going to be 5 years in November, that they have to take action against those who masterminded the Mumbai attacks. Do you see that there is a linkage between the militants who attacked the church in Peshawar and the masterminds of the Mumbai attacks 5 years ago, as well as those who attacked the army camp in Jammu and Kashmir yesterday?
I don't see any direct connection. There is a connection generally that the rise of terrorism, the use of violence for sectarian purposes is visible in Pakistan. The techniques used can be transferred from one front to another. That, I think, is there. The personnel get their training or their exposure to this kind of way of functioning in a particular context, and they can transfer their attention to another context. But basically what I see is a growth of sectarian sentiment inside Pakistan and lack of any kind of sensible way of dealing with that sentiment, of encouragement from outside and also from within the country to sectarian groups. Shia Sunni troubles are going on, attacks that we've just seen.
What about inside India? When the attack takes place in Samba, you have people inside India, and I'm not only talking about the political parties, but people inside India have said for a long time, especially since the Mumbai attacks in November 2008, that we cannot talk to Pakistan until all terror ceases. And we've been saying this for several years, actually. Even when former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee went to Islamabad in 2004, January, and cut a deal with then President Musharraf to say that Pakistan must stop all terror from its territory. But that doesn't seem to have happened.
Well, that's what India is aiming at. And India will continue to press for this outcome. I have no doubt that this remains a goal of our policy, goal of our dealings with Pakistan.
But why does it take so long, Uday?
If I could just back up a little bit, when you say what is it that connects Mumbai with Peshawar, if I could also add Nairobi, I'm saying if there's one element that links these three attacks, I would say it is the way in which the ideology has encouraged the perpetrators. Meaning,
which ideology?
This radical ideology of distorting the tenets of Islam and saying that we are being driven by a certain orientation of what Islam expects of us. Now, why I'm drawing attention to this is that in all three cases, they identified the victims by religion. Even in the attack on the army camp, we have a case of one Indian who said that I gave a name which was a Muslim name, and though I was Hindu, and therefore I was let off. Now, why I'm drawing attention to this is that to me, this is the virulence which you see manifesting itself in Pakistan in its sectarian dimension. Today the Shia is a target in Pakistan. Now, should we in India be concerned about these developments? My short answer is yes. This is going to get worse, to my way of reading, after 2014, when you have greater turbulence within Afghanistan.
When the Americans withdraw from
there, and the capacity of the Afghan security forces will be severely tested. Now, it is the ideology that links all these groups.
So how does it link with the Nairobi Al-Shabaab attack?
In the same thing, they identified people by their religious denomination, and then they went about attacking the people who were trapped in that particular mall.
So if you're not Muslim enough for me, Mr. Haider, is that what you think is at stake? Ex-militant group inside Pakistan, as they said, inside Nairobi, this group is supposed to be from Somalia. What are these people saying? If you're not Muslim enough for me, you do not deserve to exist.
I wouldn't go all the way with Uday. I think he has a point. Certainly this extremist sentiment has strengthened globally, and it tends to foster and encourage extremist activities, violence, and so on. But I think that too direct a link between what is happening in Nairobi, what's happening in Peshawar, and what's happening in our country,
and what happened in Mumbai,
I think such a direct link is perhaps difficult to draw in my judgment. The other thing that, of course, one must note is that while there are threats to our country, I have not seen that the most outrageous elements have incidents, most contrived and outrageous activity against Indian citizens who are innocent in these matters. I don't think that I have seen it provoking large-scale riots and reprisals against any community.
Inside India?
Inside India.
But I wanted to ask you if we can just sort of take the story a little bit towards the meeting of the two prime ministers in New York. What do you think the two countries should do and can do?
Well, I think that our Prime Minister will certainly talk about, as he has done on so many previous occasions, talk about terrorism directed against India from Pakistan, the Indo-centric policies of Pakistan, which are limitation in the growth of relations, the direct acts of terror against us. These are matters of abiding concern. But the idea would be to try and create a sense or to encourage Nawaz Sharif to curb his people. Let him understand that the way forward, something that he wants, he's made no secret of the fact that he seeks a new order of relationship with India, especially in commercial and economic relations. And so to attain that, he has to bring about normality in state relations, which means no terror, which means no attempts to this India-centric policy to bring correctives into these activities.
Uday, is terror on top of your agenda? I also want to ask you about Kashmir. Kashmir has been an issue for so many decades now. And again, the terrorist attack takes place in Jammu and Kashmir. Is India saying that Kashmir is no longer on the India-Pakistan agenda and that it's only terrorism?
No, I don't think so. I would even suggest that there is a continuity in the Indian position going back to the NDA years, the January 2004 agreement signed between Mr. Vajpayee as Indian Prime Minister and General Musharraf. And the central feature there was that the Pakistani state must commit itself to desist from supporting any kind of terror activity against India. And one of the phrases is including areas controlled by Pakistan, meaning the euphemism for POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir. So I would submit that terror still remains right on top of the list as far as India is concerned in terms of the dialogue with Pakistan. We called it composite, we called it resumed, we called it uninterrupted dialogue. But the engagement with Pakistan, I still maintain, should continue along that particular track, and that India should look at terror and seek this compliance. Now, that's easier said than done because of the reasons that I had mentioned earlier, that Mr. Nawaz Sharif sitting in Islamabad does not have that degree of control over policies coming out of, one, Rawalpindi, and two, Muridke, which is, I would say, euphemistically the headquarters of the non-state entities, in this case, the Lashkar-e-Taiba. But the reason why I say that India must stay the course is that we have to look at this as a multi-pronged approach. On one hand, we remain engaged on the terror issue. We seek compliance. Nawaz Sharif may not be able to deliver
Kashmir,
it.
I wanted you to talk a little bit about
Kashmir is part of that, meaning that if the Pakistani state is able to ensure that the kind of support that India has, good evidence to back up, is now not on the radar anymore, and there is some semblance of a return to normalcy, then we go back to various formulations, including, I would say, what Mr. Narasimha Rao as Prime Minister.
No, but Mr. Haider, you were, as Foreign Secretary, you're the one that was responsible for creating the composite dialogue, if I'm not wrong. Now, the question is, Mr. Haider, is that if terror is on top of the Indian agenda, so is Kashmir. Then why is it that India and Pakistan really haven't gotten around to talking about Kashmir? Do you think we should?
I think that's excellent observation and question, because I think we have actually talked about Kashmir. I think that what has happened in the time of Musharraf with our present Prime Minister, the back-channel talks that took place, and which evolved a kind of 4-point, I can never remember how many points there are.
It's a 4-point formula.
It's 4 points, but if you add it up, it's really more than 4. But the point is that it brought a measure of agreement or convergence, I would say, between the two countries on the most sensitive issue between us.
So you're saying that in the back channel, this is in the first UPA government, that the two governments, India and Pakistan, did talk about Kashmir. What did they talk about? They talked about demilitarization.
Demilitarization was important, but
yes.
The main thing is that one element is that a solution without territorial transfers. So you settle along peace for you.
Essentially, India's Kashmir would remain with India and Pakistan's Kashmir would remain with Pakistan.
That's one. Another element would be softening the borders.
The line of control.
The line of control would be easily,
the two Kashmir.
yes, sort of, shall we say, easy to cross for both sides. Then a certain amount of joint activity, tourism, environment, economically beneficial activities. I think environment is very important there, because what happens on one side of Kashmir affects what's happening on the other side. And then some joint mechanisms.
So why is it that we have failed to talk about these, Uday, what Mr. Haider just talked?
If you remember Dr. Manmohan Singh as Prime Minister in UPA 1, there was this, what I would call as it still remains the Holy Grail, that the line of control becomes a line of contact. And it's in that spirit that various initiatives were actually advanced, and we had what I would call as some very positive signs. 2005
in UPA 1, the Prime Minister does undertake a series of roundtables with Kashmir, including roundtable on autonomy. But nothing ever happened. Nobody ever talked about that in any serious way.
Well, I would say there are various reasons for it, mainly because I think there was a need to have consensus across many tracks again. One was India-Pakistan, which was Delhi-Islamabad. The other was Islamabad-Rawalpindi, which is between the civilian and the military within Pakistan. Then there was a need to have some consensus between Delhi-Srinagar. And I think there was not enough traction in both capitals, both in UPA 1, and at that time General Musharraf it was the beginning of the end of the Musharraf era, for a variety of reasons. But I'm just saying that the line of contact was the Manmohan Singh vision, and it was also shared by Mr. Vajpayee. So again, there is continuity. But where all of this is derailed is by the same constituency that I spoke about at the very outset. Those who are committed to spoiling what seems to be any movement, because they have a completely different agenda. And that was my reason for trying to link Nairobi with Mumbai, with Peshawar, to say that there is a certain ideology today that has become very virulent in Pakistan.
I think any Prime Minister, Mr. Haider, not only Manmohan Singh, would say that India's borders must be completely secure. And as we saw in Samba yesterday, perhaps tanks were used for the first time to repulse these insurgents who came across the line of control, as India's Home Minister, Mr. Shinde, has just said. But I'd like to ask you, and if I could talk a little bit more about the conversation between Delhi and Srinagar, to which Uday has alluded. Do you think it might help to talk a little bit more, to might have a political conversation about autonomy, perhaps about a variety of other things, short of any territorial transfer or exchange or ceding of absolutely any territory? Do you think that this could be one way forward?
I think it is a very important issue. I think it is a key issue. And it's the one that was identified as a round table on the subject. But as you had mentioned earlier, nothing much came of it. There was no real discussion. But it is something with multiple dimensions. It's not only between Srinagar and Delhi. Although it would be up to Delhi to find the appropriate arrangements to meet what the Kashmiris seem to want in terms of enhanced autonomy. In which, of course, they're not alone in India.
Sure.
Other parts of the country also want comparable arrangements. But a stable arrangement for enhanced autonomy would have an impact on relations across the line of control. And I think it's important to see this in a more holistic manner. It is, in fact, part of the 4-point plan or agenda that came out. But it's not been teased out in detail, so we don't really know what it could be. But that is the direction that would be necessary if this 4-point formula is going to develop any traction.
For me, what was also interesting during my Pakistan visit a few days ago was that a lot of people from, well, not a lot, but at least a few people from Gilgit-Baltistan wanted greater interaction with Indians living in Kargil and in Ladakh, in the Leh and the Kargil areas. But unfortunately, and they were talking about this bus from Gilgit or from Skardu to Kargil, just like there is one between Srinagar and Muzaffarabad and Poonch and Rawalakot in the Jammu region. But unfortunately, I think the Pakistan government is not interested in a bus between Skardu and Kargil. But to ask you both, if we were to talk about the agenda between the two prime ministers in New York, can I ask you to perhaps expand on the economic idea? Do you think that could be a game changer between India and Pakistan, especially in the immediate future?
Definitely. Trade and economic ties, I think, could be a very big determinant of improving the relationship between India and Pakistan. And this is something that Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and Dr. Manmohan Singh know, I think, in great detail. And after all, Dr. Manmohan Singh has said this many times. And even before he became Prime Minister, Mr. Nawaz Sharif has often talked about the possibilities of normalizing the trade and economic relationship. And there are various, I would say, products and various avenues that could be explored. But none of this, Jyoti, I think, is really going to take off in an environment which is vitiated by terror.
But I'd like to ask you, Mr. Haider, if Uday believes that terror should be or is on top of the Indian agenda, but I'm just wondering whether to use the economic relationship as the thin end of the wedge to expand the variety of options between our two countries. For example, now Pakistan we've been talking about MFN, or Most Favoured Nation status, that Pakistan has not given India for several years, 25 or 26 years. But if you were to drop that phrase and call it full trade normalization, for example, you can call it by any other name, or unban investments from Pakistan into India, which I believe we still don't have because there is an Indian ruling or a law. Now, do you think that if we were to do this, open it up much more, open up the visa regime, let people travel not only across Baga and Atari, but also in Kokrapar Munabao in the Sindh and Rajasthan regions at the LOC, how do you think that could transform the relationship?
I think it could be transformative. It will be very important. This, in fact, is what India has been trying to work for years now. And the thin end of the wedge, as you said, this is what it could be. But it cannot function without some measure of agreement. They're not blind, we are not blind. So if there is going to be liberalized trade agreement, trade coming and going, it is because both sides want it to happen. I think we are advancing in that direction, very slowly, but we have much more trade between India and Pakistan today than we had some years ago. In fact, it's more than just a blip in the trade statistics, and I think we are advancing in that direction. We have to see whether we can advance more rapidly and more meaningfully.
Can I ask you to expand a little bit more perhaps on the water issue? Why is it that water has become such an important issue for Pakistan?
Water, unfortunately, is something which has been played up wrongly. And
by the Pakistanis?
Yes, deliberately wrongly. There is a treaty arrangement, the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960, and this is working. But as Pakistan feels the shortage of water, its own position regarding water is becoming more stressed. It is easy for those who want to create disturbances in bilateral ties to seize on this issue and to emphasize it and to play it up as a kind of piece of ill will by India, which is denying Pakistan its legitimate due of water.
Last questions to both of you. Uday, what are the 2 points that you have for the two prime ministers in New York?
How do we deal with the scourge of terror? And secondly, against this backdrop, what are the kind of policy initiatives that need to be addressed to ensure that we create an environment or an ambiance wherein Indo-Pak relations can move towards greater levels of normalization?
Mr. Haider, yours?
Well, terror has to be tackled. Apart from that, I think that we should be able to talk about easing of contact, about coming and going, trade, making a somewhat more normal situation.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You were listening to a discussion on terror attacks and India-Pakistan relations. The participants were Salman Haider, former Foreign Secretary, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, Security Analyst, and Jyoti Malhotra, Senior Journalist, who initiated and moderated the discussion. It came to you in the program Current Affairs, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.